Welcome back, and thank you for attending this session on the last afternoon of World Travel Market. I know the temptation is to head off to the bar at this time of the afternoon, so thank you for that. I'm Mark Frary. I'm the co-founder of Travel Perspective, along with Steve Keenan, who you'll have seen in the previous session. So Travel Perspective, we've been working with World Travel Market for, this is the 8th year now, fantastic to be involved with this. We're a social and digital agency that helps destinations and travel companies tell their stories, and we work with influencers to do that, as well as sharing some of our own experiences, old-fashioned Fleet Street travel journalists. And you can find a bit more about us at travelperspective.co.uk. Now, when I was first involved as a travel journalist, we never talked about content at all. It was all words, so and articles in that sort of bigger extent. So, but these days, you never really talk about that. It's all about content. And web and mobile in particular have democratized the creation, curation, and consumption of that content. And what travel companies have realized is that they no longer have any need for travel writing dinosaurs like me, which is why I've sort of pivoted into this new role. And so they've become publishers of content in their own right. But what many travel companies have actually realized is it's not quite as easy as it seems. You know, all of those people, the newspaper editors, the travel editors, the travel journalists, they are actually pretty good at their jobs and knew what could actually get people excited about going to a new destination. And I think those of you who were in the session before, heard that about the power of a travel image to get people excited about going to somewhere. And so those travel companies realize that creating content is not as easy as it looks, and it doesn't automatically lead to a new booking. And hopefully that's what you're all here for, is to find out how we can use great content to convert into a booking. And I'm really pleased today to be joined by 3 experts on this. On my left is Kash Bhattacharya, who's from BudgetTraveller. So I've known Kash since the very early days of World Travel Market, in the days before the concept of influencer even existed. Very, very popular content creator, blogger, influencer. And so he's going to share his expertise about that. Worked with some great brands in travel on that. Next to Kash, we have Rich Kimber, who's chief writer at Melt Content, a content marketing agency, worked with lots of travel companies in that. And last but not least, we have Joanna Duncan, who's chief marketing officer of Insight Vacations, part of the Travel Corporation. So welcome to you all. Now, I'd just like each of you to, I know I've given you a sort of a lead in there, but perhaps you could just talk about your role in the industry and what you think about content and what it is. Kash.
Yeah, I've been now 9 years coming to World Travel Market, and I obviously have my own platform called the BudgetTraveller, which is about how to travel in style on a budget. So my challenge as a content creator has been how to create content that will make people think differently about budget travel. Because when I talk about budget travel, and I mentioned in my presentation just a while ago that when I talked about hostels, people always think of a very negative image of hostels. So part of my challenge as a content creator is to help shift the perception of how people see hostels and budget travel, and it's a big responsibility. And so, for me, content is what is emotionally engages and takes people on holiday, and it's a very, very great responsibility to have that. So, so yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, when you first started out, I mean, you were writing a lot, but have you had to sort of branch out into other areas of content, images and video? I mean, I know you've got your book out there now as well. Big plug for that, great book.
Yeah, it's the job of a content creator it's like, I don't want to say jack of all trades, but you have to be the master of all trades. You really have to know how to emotionally engage your audience, because now we live in a world of visual content. So learning to take great photographs, updating your Instagram stories, doing video content, writing content that people want to read about, doing the research. It's a really onerous job as a one-person publisher to do all those roles that traditionally is divided amongst 20 other people in other publishing companies.
And I know we've talked about a burnout as well among influencers, because they're sort of constantly seen as this sort of creative tap that can create content 24 hours a day. And we've talked about the whole idea of digital nomads, for example, and that's quite a worrying scenario. And the travel companies are perhaps asking influencers to do more than they should be doing.
Yeah, the problem I see at the moment is this, what I call the industrialization of content, where brands are ticking off the box and they need 5 Instagram photos and they need this, and the problem is, because it is a very competitive industry, I'm tending to find that people are chasing reach, and in the process of chasing reach, we are creating these cookie cutter kind of Instagram photos that everybody's fed up of. Like, if I see another picture of hot air balloons over Cappadocia, I'm just gonna just kill myself. And it seems to be that we're chasing it for the gram, but we're not forgetting about how to emotionally engage our readers and how to tell stories, because I feel in the whole drive for that, you suddenly don't want to do the less fashionable things like having stuffing your face with food, and I don't do selfies, by the way. I hate putting myself on camera sometimes, but I try and put the people and the place in my photos. That doesn't get me as many likes as other people do, but I'm happy with that.
Good. So, Rich, over to you. Melt content. I mean, you've got the word content in the name of the company. What does it do?
Yeah.
Melt content.
So my role at Melt is, as you said, I'm chief writer. My background is predominantly editorial and writing initially. I started my travel content life 10 years ago as an in-house copywriter at a travel agency. And that was in a fairly traditional kind of writing remit, looking at those things like, kind of basic QA, sub-editing, and all of those things that you typically tend to think of when you think about travel writing, telling great stories, right down to the kind of micro level of getting first lines right, those kinds of things. Latterly, my role at Melt Content forms the, so what we specialize in is organic strategy for travel brands. So my remit within that is looking at how we turn data and kind of hard data insights into content strategies that work on a commercial level for brands, whether that is a destination guide, a series of articles that might be inspirational, or whether that is a much more transactional thing where you have 50-odd pages that are targeting the right terms and the right needs. But our perspective on producing content, and particularly quality, which is what we're kind of focusing on, is all about utility. So one of the things I think that it's important to recognize with content is that, as you've quite rightly said, it's not just the written word, but it's also not that kind of bucket of stuff that we label ourselves as content creators and produce. It's not just text, images, video. It's anything that informs. So on an e-commerce site, it's pricing and how that's presented. It's star reviews. It's ratings. It's absolutely everything that informs, and particularly my sort of caveat in brackets also, that brands need to bear in mind is that helps your customers, your travelers, make decisions.
So the clients who come to you, what are they typically looking for, and do they actually know what they're looking for? Do they say, well, I need some copy for my website, but actually do you go back to them and say, actually, that's not really exactly what you need?
I mean, that's a perfect example, actually. Yeah, I mean, The travel industry is the same as any, really, in that, yes, from an agency perspective, you get clients who know exactly what they want. You get clients who think they know what they want, and maybe there's a better alternative. You get clients come to you who say, I've got absolutely no idea where to start. And we fulfill each of those remits. But yeah, that point that you make about content and particularly strategies being fit for purpose is a really good one, because it's that in particular is symptomatic of a slightly outdated way of looking at content, which is this quantity thing and the idea that as long as I'm producing content, it's going to do something. Content for content's sake is just not worth doing, and that's the opposite of quality, you know. And again, from my perspective, this idea of quality isn't necessarily about Pulitzer Prize winning journalism. It's not necessarily about beautiful looking design or fantastic photography or video with really, really high production values. It's about content that meets the needs of a user. And the hard part of that is establishing exactly what the needs are in the first place. That's the bit that takes a lot of legwork. After that, whether it's a 1,000-word article or whether it turns out that maybe you thought it was going to be a 1,000-word article and actually a table and a list of bullets does the job, that's just as valid a piece of content, if you like, as anything else.
Joanna, if I can talk to you now. I mean, you're coming from this from a different side of the industry. These guys are providers of that content. You're a consumer of that content. And you've been doing this job for a while now. Has it actually changed very much in that time, your role?
Yeah, I think it has. I think for me, good content has to fulfill three things. It's got to be valuable, it's got to be relevant, and it's got to be consistent. And so I came into Insight Vacations 2 years ago, and if I'm really honest, I think we were getting it right maybe 2 times out of 3, maybe sometimes even 1 time out of 3. So pretty early on, I said, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to invest in it, then we need to make sure we're getting a strike growth, 3 times out of 3, otherwise we're just not being effective. And when I went out and I spoke to the marketing community, we've got 8 separate marketing regions, and I spoke to the heads of marketing in those geographies, and they said, we understand our brand proposition, we understand what we do, but we don't necessarily know how to sell it as well as we should. It's a confession. We're not sure exactly how to differentiate ourselves from our competitors. We're in a cluttered market space. How do we get that differentiation? And I think if you think of an image, it's not that hard to showcase a destination. With the blue sky and the sunshine and maybe the sandy beach, add in a couple of smiles and you've got a perfect formula for that. But that's not giving you the same what you need to do is to actually show the experience and the value that you bring as that travel provider to make people choose you. So that's really why we've started to make content marketing really at the heart of our marketing strategy. I'd say it's still relatively early days for us. We're not as advanced as some of the other brands within the Travel Corporation portfolio, but we're definitely getting there. Prior to joining Insight Vacations, I was at Expedia, where I led the business-to-business marketing group on the hotelier side. So my team there was doing something quite different. Again, we were trying to educate the hotel community to say, content's important. Give us more of your fabulous content. We want to put it on our brand websites because we knew the power of conversion. And so there we were very, very much powered by data. We were able to have very real conversations with the hotels to say, if you give us this type of content, this is what it will do for your conversion on our website. So it's been really nice to take kind of the data and the science behind it that I had from Expedia, bring that into Insight Vacations, because it's a sort of hard one to convince people of the power of content to get started in that journey, because it takes quite a lot of work.
And marketing budgets have changed enormously over the last decade, haven't they? I mean, it was in the past, there had been a budget line for the brochure, the paper brochure, and any sort of advertising you were doing around it, perhaps, the ad break in the middle of Coronation Street or something like that. But, content was never really a part of that. I mean, do you think marketing directors and CMOs like you have sort of recognized that you actually do need to allocate money and a decent amount of money to that?
Absolutely. Again, when I came in, I didn't have a line item for it in my budget. I said, how much are you spending on this? And it was blended into other parts. So again, I wanted to be absolutely clear what our commitment was to getting good content and to give it its own dedicated line item so that we could see the investment that we needed to make in that. So again, I think that's a big change that a few years ago it didn't seem necessary, and now it does.
Kash, I mean, you're on the receiving end of that line item there. I mean, have you noticed any change in the industry from travel companies about their willingness to actually invest in having influencers like you create good content?
Yes, there's definitely been a huge shift. You have to see just this world travel market and the last few world travel markets. Since I started coming since 2010, there's been a huge shift about how people see our role, and people are switching on that these guys have a lot of experience in writing content. They're experts. They can give us lots of valuable insights about our product, because sometimes I always say, think of the blogger, not the blog. There's a whole skill set that a content creator has, and that's just not restricted to just creating content. So now I'm doing a lot of consultancy work with destinations and with hostels, because that's my passion. So I sit down and I give them advice on their content strategy. And it's so sophisticated, because if you think where content sits in different stages of the booking and planning cycle of a trip, there's so many different types of content for so many different types of needs. So it's really, really exciting time to be a content creator, because there's so much ways you can, and every blogger, content creator has access to their data and statistics and analytics, so they can give all that data to the company and say, look, this is what my readers are looking for. We should maybe focus on writing content around this area.
So have you found that influencers have had to sort of learn the language of marketing, though, all about the marketing funnel and, you know, what those touch points all the way through there? I mean, or are they still sort of amateurs, hammering away on their laptops?
I like to think that a lot of now the really good content creators, the really superstar top bloggers and content creators, they really understand that, and it's through coming to events like World Travel Market and speaking to brands and learning about their objectives that they have to understand what they want and what kind of content they need. So it's that learning process. But at the same time, the danger always is that once you start getting into the mindset of the marketeer, you kind of lose a little bit of your authenticity. And that's where we're at the moment, is that we're at this kind of fine point of, we got to remember that we're content creators, not marketeers.
Yeah, I think we had a really good point in the previous session from Benji talking about authenticity, and I don't know if you were actually involved in that research, because it was from Expedia.
Yeah.
And it was about the percentage of people who really want authenticity, and so when it's controlled by the marketing department, how do you feel about handing over that control, where you had that control before with the creative control on what your advert looked like, for example, but how do you feel about handing that over to a content creator like Kash?
I think we have to hand it over. The marketing messages that a brand wants to put out has its place, and it will always have its place. But the reason that influencers can be so successful is because people want to hear what other people think. They have all the different messages they're receiving, and they want to weigh up what the company's saying about itself with what somebody else is saying. So I think if you try and influence your influencers too much and fill them up with too much brand language, they end up speaking just like you, and immediately, because you've lost the authenticity, you've also lost the effectiveness. And ultimately, if you're going to invest in something as a brand, you want that marketing effort to be effective. So retaining the authenticity is absolutely crucial.
And do you think that's just a phase we're going through with influencers and content creators? I mean, in the way that we had with travel writers traditionally. I mean, do you think this is here for the long term?
I think it's already changed. I think it's changed enormously in the last 3 or 4 years. I think influencers for many travel brands were so important, but I think the marketplace has become flooded. It's become very, very popular and a relatively easy thing to do. And what's happened is some of the quality has been diluted. So I think it's now harder for brands to actually work out who are the right influencers for them to work with, and who's going to have the right messaging and the right resonance with their audience. So I think it's here to stay, but I think the landscape has already changed, and it's certainly going to change again in the future.
Rich, I wanted to come to you, because I remember when we first started Travel Perspective, we had companies coming to us and saying, we want people to create content for us, and they wanted to stuff their websites with thousands of landing pages, very sort of search engine optimized, and I mean, where do you sit in that? Were people coming to you with that same sort of idea that they just wanted content and they didn't really care what it was, as long as it had the phrase that they were looking for? Malaga beach or something like that.
Yeah, do you like hotels in Malaga? Come by our hotels in Malaga. Yeah. No, not so much anymore. I actually think that quite a lot of the industry has cottoned onto the idea of quality as propagated by Google. And I mean, that kind of model of producing content is all of 6 years out of date now. I mean, Google effectively called time on that with Panda in 2012. And I think that the focus on quality has increased, but I think there's also now, and it's just about now, what we're seeing is a change that kind of needs to happen and hasn't quite happened yet, in that there is still quite a lot of focus on keywords. So keyword research is invaluable and it's a very, very important part of your content strategy. But the thing that we're trying to communicate at Melt is that keywords don't buy holidays, people do. And what keywords are not necessarily something that you need to be chasing as the be-all and end-all. Keywords are a hint to a set of behaviors and a specific need and a specific intent. And they can tell you a lot about the human beings behind them. But it's only once you do, again, quite a lot of the legwork and kind of analyzing huge sets of keywords and enormous data sets to understand what those kind of needs are. So, for example, understanding exactly what the behaviors are behind someone looking for cheap hotels in Malaga, and whether there are more kind of specific topics that you could be talking to them about, and also understanding what you're able to offer from the point of view of your brand. So are you an enormous OTA that's able to throw quite a lot of resource at going after those kind of broader terms, or are you more of a niche provider, and can you actually talk in great detail about specific beaches and give people the kind of things that they actually need to plan a holiday? I think that's where a lot of the kind of larger publishers or publishing brands could maybe be doing better, is getting away from the idea of a travel guide as here's some stuff about a destination, and thinking of it more as here's what we can specifically offer you in that destination, and matching that to a commercial goal, to a commercial intent as well, and marrying them up. And that's what we're doing.
That's good. I mean, that's the point, I think, of what we're trying to do here is, getting away from just saying content at any cost, but actually stuff that converts. And I mean, Kash, when you've worked with lots of different travel and tourism brands, are they interested in that, or do they just think we've just got to get content, or are they much more focused on saying, actually, we know that we need to get conversions, and we're going to work back from that to work out the content that we require from you?
Yeah, I tend to find that the best brands and destinations that have the best campaigns with content creators are the ones that actually just say, you know what, we trust and love your content, we know your voice, just go out there and do your magic. It's always a process of experimentation and seeing what works. I always say that sometimes if you start creating content around what people need, then you're missing out on a whole other area of amazing things. And I say it's the unwanted needs of travelers. What are the unwanted needs of travelers? Like when I started 9 years ago, there was no demand for design hostels. I came up with this idea on a hunch and wrote about it, and now people are asking for more information about this new breed of design hostels. So think in your market and think in your business, what unwanted needs of your customers, and try and be a bit bold and experiment, because I don't see that enough. I always see it's too marketing driven, the whole content approach towards working with influencers, and that needs to change.
Joanna, I just wanted to bring you in on this. I mean, how do you, think about your content in terms of conversion? I mean, do you have KPIs around that? How how to...
Yeah, it's a difficult conversation. It's a difficult conversation sometimes for marketers to have internally when they're trying to pitch content marketing to the budget holder. And I think the way I really look at it, I would never look at one particular piece of content, put it out there, and then see, what has this one thing delivered for me? It would be very, very difficult to get that granular. And I think that's a challenge for marketers, especially those that have grown up in traditional marketing, where they put a piece of direct mail out, they stick a direct response phone number on, and then they can go and say what that piece of activity, what the return on investment was. It's a little bit different with the content marketing, and everything that we do is part of an overall content marketing strategy. It will be a collection of different things that we would do, as opposed to one singular item. So we might talk about a destination and the experience that you could have there, but we'd also be talking about the food that you'd eat in that destination, maybe talking about recipes that are there, and building that overall value piece. So we're more looking at the overall trends rather than looking at individual results to a particular piece.
And I know we're focusing a lot on the sort of social media and influencer and digital side of things, but how does offline fit into all of this with what you're doing? Yeah.
So for us, offline is absolutely huge. Because of the demographic of who we're selling to, so we're selling to generally people 55 plus, affluent, empty nesters now, their children have left home, that's not financially dependent on them. They're also traditionally buying from your high street travel agent. So for them, because of their shopping behavior, they really like something tangible that they can take away, they can take home, they can pour over at their leisure. So putting content marketing into the physical printed brochure for us has been really important. So on the Insight Vacations brand, our premium brand, we've moved it from being a product catalog where we're simply selling to start to introduce storytelling. And so in the introductory pages, when we're trying to talk in general about the experiences that we've got, if I give you an example, maybe an experience that we would offer, our guests would go and visit a chef at a farm-to-table restaurant in Perugia. And when they were there, they wouldn't just meet the chef, but they'd be introduced to his grandmother, who would come and talk about traditional Italian cooking and probably demonstrate how to hand-roll orecchiette pasta. So in the brochure, what we do is we interview not just the chef, but also his grandmother, and we ask them about the things that Insight guests particularly enjoy when they come to visit, and the things that they talk about, the typical questions that they ask. And by doing that, we're able to much more accurately convey the experience of what it's like for a guest that might be interested in doing that. On Luxury Gold, we've taken it a step further. We've really moved from having a brochure into what we call a magazine. So we've got really good travel articles in there from most visited cities around the world, music, food, wine, etc. And the goal really has been there to create a long-lasting kind of coffee table piece for magazine. We want to inspire people to travel, and if while they're reading our exciting story, they choose to travel with us, all the better. Because what we know from our audience is their planning cycle is really long. Generally, they know where they're going to go 2 or 3 holidays' time. Sometimes they've booked already. Other times they've just planned in their heads. They know what destination they're going to, what they're going to do when they get there, and probably who they're going to travel with. So we need to start influencing them several holidays ahead of when they're actually going to be making that purchasing decision and get them in the consideration zone. So for us, it's really important to have a piece of content that's got that long shelf life so that we're still around when they finally move into the consideration phase and we become kind of first of mind.
Yeah, we talked a lot to our clients about the whole idea of storytelling, and that's what we can bring as travel writers. Even though the medium that is being used now is moved from paper to digital, but storytelling is still there, and that still strikes a chord with people. And I mean, is this what clients are asking you for? They want stories rather than just like a plain piece of description of a destination.
It varies. I think that that storytelling element is maybe not being seen all the way through. Just picking up on what you were saying about basically there still being a role for what you might think of as kind of traditional print journalism. There was quite a recent stat that from I think published in The Guardian that quite a high percentage of people, more than half, still travel with a printed guidebook. And that, I think, is where digitally the travel industry can catch up, and there probably is an opportunity to be there in destination. So, I mean, we get lots of briefs and produce inspirational content that's targeted during that kind of now digitally traditional dreaming planning phase. And then there's kind of a gap. You get to booking, and then what happens after booking and in destination? These are still important parts of a travel customer's kind of life cycle with you. And particularly for customer retention, I think there's definitely an opportunity there, whether it's digital content that's served up offline or whether it is making that content available digitally and usable in destination. There's certainly a gap there. But from a general kind of storytelling perspective, I think it's something that brands still want. It depends on the nature of the brand. If you are a kind of more traditional e-commerce brand, then matching kind of storytelling and kind of softer content, if you like, and not necessarily the things that you would expect to find on a booking landing page. A little while ago, that was potentially quite a hard sell because it was difficult to kind of match up exactly how telling what, say, an e-commerce manager might see as something a bit fluffy relates to conversion. The point that we're at now is such that with various kind of aspects of machine learning and the ability to process massive amounts of data and get much more detailed insights into customers, there is, I think, a way to plug that kind of more storytelling, inspirational content produced in a very specific way to a very specific brief, and that's the important part, having focus and purpose in the brief behind producing the content, into a commercial goal and actually monetizing it and turning it into conversions.
Yeah. So, Joanna, how do you actually attribute the purchase to the piece of marketing or content that you've created? I mean, you must have this issue all the time. It's much more measurable now than it ever was, but there's still an uncertainty whether somebody has seen an Instagrammer's picture of Angkor Wat and then thought, I'm going to book something, or whether it's something specifically that you've done.
Yeah, and so I'd queried, I would say let's not tie ourselves in knots about it. It is challenging to do, and if that's how we have to justify it to upper levels of management, we could spend a lot of time trying to find that data as opposed to creating the content. So I would say, yes, if we were promoting Cambodia, we would have a Instagrammer's post of Angkor Wat. It's also going to be supported by the recipe of how to make the best noodles, maybe a guide on where to find the best dumplings in a given town. We're going to have a story about going on a local fishing trip with a local family, or maybe even a video of doing a really enthralling tuk-tuk ride. It's about all those different pieces working together and supporting Cambodia as a destination and traveling with the brand, as opposed to worrying about what that one piece is doing. So I think, just like I said before, it's about it coming together and having that as part of a strategy, and how about different content pieces. And then if the sales are going in the right direction, then that's a good thing. But it's part of the overall marketing piece.
Kash, I wanted to talk to you about some speakers that we had here a couple of years ago. We had the Advertising Standards Agency talking about sponsored posts and how they needed influencers to start indicating that. Have you found that influencers have actually started putting ad or spawn on their sponsored posts, and does it actually make any difference to people in terms of actually converting that booking?
I actually find that if the content is good and it's relevant and it's inspiring and it's going to add value to the person looking at that Instagram photo, yes, disclosure is very important. But the funny irony of the thing is that once you do disclose on Instagram and say it is a sponsored post, unless the client is willing to put budget behind it to promote that content, your organic reach plummets on that post, because Instagram wants either the content creator or the brand they're promoting to spend money. So it sometimes defeats the purpose, because in the end of the day, I did a really cool campaign with Google Arts where I was promoting the reopening of their new museum in Berlin. And I did state clearly paid partnership. And yeah, the organic reach on that was terrible because the moment I disclosed it and the client hadn't thought about putting money behind to promote that content so that it would reach up to my whole 33,000 followers on Instagram. So it's a double-edged sword, and that's why sometimes I know some content creators are reluctant to state that. But I think first and foremost, it should be about the quality of the content.
Yeah. I mean, do you think, though, there should be a disclosure of putting money behind it on whatever platform it is, or actually paying money to the influencer? Because there's a very subtle difference there, isn't it? Because I know we've had this discussion here a lot.
Yeah.
So, I mean, travel journalists, traditional print journalists, obviously there's money involved there. It doesn't necessarily go directly to the travel journalist, but indirectly it does through their salary or something.
Yeah.
So, should it be all about the money that's directly been paid to Instagram or Facebook, and those ones need ad or spawn on them?
I think you're paying the content creator for the content. You're not paying them to promote the content. I think first and foremost, let's focus on letting them create their amazing content. And then it's your job as a marketeer then, if you've contracted the content creator, to then take that content and seed that in different platforms. That's where you earn your money, but I don't think the pressure shouldn't be on the content creator to create the engagement and market that content, because sometimes, as I said, it starts making the content creator create content that will get the highest engagement, and that isn't necessarily the best content for the destination of the brand.
We've only got a few more minutes left, but I just wanted to open up the floor to you out there if you have any questions for our panel today. If you want to raise your hand, we have a couple of microphones at the back there. Does anybody want to ask specific questions? Just one in the middle there.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I was wondering whether you could tell me what makes a good story.
What makes a good story?
So I think it depends who you're speaking to. I think we talked about conversion. I think one of the most important things that is going to convert is going to be if it's relevant to that audience. But I think what makes a really good story is what's going to be valuable and giving them something that they can't get elsewhere. We think put value and relevancy together. Again, you've got to know your audience and who you're speaking to. If we have a trip in Croatia and I've told you what my audience is, got an image or some content of 21-year-olds jumping off a speedboat into the sparkling waters of the Adriatic, it's not going to resonate with my audience at all. That's not where they want to be. It's a great image. We can all picture that in our heads. Some of us want to be there and some of us don't. What my guests want to be experiencing is a sailing boat going around the walled city of Dubrovnik as the sun's setting with a glass of champagne in their hand and eating oysters. That's the type of story that they want. So I say first and foremost, understand what your audience is looking for and then think about the type of story that's going to resonate with them. But they've got to be able to transport themselves into that story and be able to feel that they could be there and live it themselves.
Okay. Question down the front here. The second row. We'll come to you afterwards.
Hi. Well, first of all, thank you all. I would like you to, if it is possible for you to elaborate a little bit on the concept of authenticity. Because, in academia or in the literature, there are different points of views of what it is authentic. And actually, some authors go even further and they say, like, nowadays, there isn't anything authentic anymore because everything is pretty much staged or prepared. So yeah, around those lines, then how would you say that when a content is authentic or not?
Yeah.
Or,
Rich, maybe you could take that. What do you think is authentic, or what do you create that's authentic?
I'd infer there are maybe kind of two parts to that question. Maybe one's an influencer thing, but I suppose as a broader concept and particularly the kind of campaigns that I work on, it's just about not trying to fool your audience. I think it's part of this, I think, slightly unhelpful binary opposition of conversational and interruptional marketing. I don't think it's quite as simple as that. You can, sometimes you can sell very, very clearly, and it's perfectly authentic if you have a 60% off flight sale to go sell, 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 we've got a sale on. That's authentic. That's a helpful, useful message. Equally, if you establish that actually kind of more inspirational content that doesn't have a kind of obvious transactional value, but you still have a commercial goal behind that, if you establish that that's going to be useful for you, as long as it's useful for the customer that you're serving it to as well, that's perfectly authentic too. I don't think monetization doesn't have to be a dirty word when it comes to content. You can get something out of it at the same time as your customer getting something out of it too.
Great. We just have time for one more question there. Thank you.
This is actually a question for you. Right at the start, you mentioned the term digital nomad. What is a digital nomad?
Well, actually, Kash is probably better placed to do this because he's becoming one or become one recently. Actually, I've written a piece about him interviewing Kash just because he's about to do that. So over to you.
Yeah, digital nomad is a very glamorous term for a person that has a homeless life, living out of a backpack and traveling the world and running his business from basically hotels, hostels, and apartments. It is a fantastic life because it allows me to travel, it allows me to understand what my readers need, and I can run my business from any part of the world. And the whole idea of the beauty of it is that I have no fixed hours, no fixed office place. I'm free to do what I love doing and travel at the same time, which is my other passion.
Great. I just want to finish up by asking each of our panelists for one great tip on producing great content. Joanna.
Oof. Produce great content. I think it comes back again to knowing your audience. You have to know your audience or you're not going to know what content is going to resonate most of them. So I think get to understanding that and then pick what's right for them and test. I think it came up earlier again. You don't know what's going to work until you try it. So have the confidence to try it, look at what's happening and adjust if you need to. That would be my biggest tip.
Rich.
Nail on head, that's exactly where I would start. And after that, know what's in it for you as well. So don't just produce content for content's sake. And it's great to give great content away, but if you don't know exactly what it's going to do for you or what it's supposed to do for you, then you can't expect to be able to measure it or declare it as successful. So have a goal in mind.
And last word to you, Kash.
Create content that people can relate to and that emotionally engages people. Don't go down the celebrity influencer route and create a vision of a destination or of a place that only people can dream of. Make them feel that they can go there.
Great. Well, thank you all for your time, Kash, Rich, and Joanna. And I'm sure that they'll hang around for a couple of minutes if you have any specific questions afterwards. And I just want you to put your hands together for sharing their time and expertise today. Thank you.